The Ibrahim Student Leadership and Dialogue Program has completed another engaging immersion in 5 Middle Eastern countries. This film chronicles the fun, the friendship, and the learning that took place. It's a diverse group of Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and other students. It captures the full spectrum of opinion of different students. It captures everything that happened that prepares the students for the combating of the greatest weapon of mass destruction, ignorance.
Are you ready? I'm ready. Are you sure? Yeah.
There was a stark difference in each place, from the high-rises of Dubai to the picturesque white houses in Oman. This beauty was so different but so striking in each place.
And our professor took us on this beautiful hike.
Hi.
We just saw so much beauty. Just being immersed in nature for that long was truly an experience unlike any other I've ever had. And then to be able to go to the hotel with the beautiful swimming pool directly after was fantastic.
Why you push me?
So my favorite place, I think, was Wadi Rum. We got to take jeeps out into the desert.
So fun.
And it was one of the first days of Ramadan, so we got to break our fast while just playing in the sand and looking at the sun as it went down.
Oh, that's so good.
And then once we were at the camp, we got to wander around and we got to see all of the stars and have a few moments of just silence and thinking about how small we are and how big the world is.
I'd say this is a group of students that bonded really well. People could wander in and out of different groups.
Wait, I didn't record.
One of the greatest things about this program was what we did outside of the program. It was our freedom to explore on our own and not stick with the itinerary.
This group was more active in the night than any group we've had before.
You see the old remains of civilization. There's nobody around at all.
One case of some friends and I were climbing a mountain in Petra alone, and we ended up we met a Bedouin woman who was selling little trinkets at the top of a mountain. We talked to her, we learned about her life, she told us some stories, we sat down and had tea with her, and we made friends with her.
It's Mill Valley. Musa, the prophet, and the water go with the valley. That's why they call it Wadi Musa.
وما معنى وادي؟ شو ترجمة؟ هي فالي؟
يلا بسم الله. توكلنا على الله. I loved meeting the locals and all the different places that we visited. It was just nice learning about their culture, about their lives, and just what makes living in their country different than living in the United States. I felt like it was the most authentic learning experience. Assalamu alaikum. الحمد لله. كيف الجامعة لك؟ والله الحمد لله. وسيم من أمريكا. ما شاء الله. حياك الله. شرفتنا والله.
It's wonderful to meet with all these world's leaders throughout the region. When we went to Oman, we were invited to a celebration from the U.S. Embassy. We were able to meet with the U.S. ambassador to Oman as well as numerous world leaders.
In Dubai, you get to see both the government and the private sector side.
And at night, we buy it back from Abu Dhabi.
And when you're in Israel, you get a really lot of exposure to both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, which really makes it different from other programs.
What are they saying about me? What are they saying?
Each country had its own culture, had its own customs. For me, that was kind of like, we have political differences, we have all these difficulties, but we are all still people, and we all do, especially in this region, all eat the same food. And that to me was a really powerful aspect.
Ooh. Wow. هذه جميلة.
English rice, Italiano riso, Arabic rose.
My favorite country that we visited was Oman. It was really a special moment for me. We visited the Grand Mosque there. When we entered the mosque, the tour guide, this woman whose name means grace in Arabic, which is the same as mine, sang happy birthday to me, and kind of in that moment I realized that you don't need to stay in your comfort zone for your religion to really feel spiritual. And I guess that just opened my mind to understanding that we all have the same purpose as far as it comes to spirituality and morals. And it was just a very touching moment for me to stand there in this house of God.
An incredible experience for me to pray in Masjid al-Aqsa during Ramadan, and to pray in the middle of Wadi Rum, in the middle of a desert, and to pray in just different countries all around the Middle East. I also had a very fascinating experience one night when I finished up a prayer in a grand mosque in Dubai, and within minutes of leaving the mosque, I found myself in the middle of a Hindu temple, which is very interesting to see how two very different religions had holy sites that were just so close together.
Visiting Jerusalem was a formative experience. This was a place I had always wanted to go to one day, having heard so much about how significant it was to so many different traditions. On the one hand, I had the opportunity to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, which is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. But on the other hand, I found it extremely difficult to experience the contrast of that spirituality with how militarized our surroundings were. It was hard for me to wrap my head around this disconnect and understand why a place so close to God for so many could also feel so hostile. And I think in a lot of ways our whole trip through the region was reconciling these contradictions.
Sitting on the slope of this mountain, it was so beautiful, but we were in a desert landscape, right? There was just the desert, the rocks, the call to prayer. It was so beautiful, but it wasn't the notion of beauty that's ingrained in my mind. I realized in that moment all of the brainwashing that American media had told me. I had associated the landscape with like Fox News broadcasts of Osama bin Laden in a cave and fearful places where American soldiers are, and being there and appreciating the beauty of that moment made me realize how special the experience of this trip is.
What I loved about the trip was the fact that I had the opportunity to go and explore so many different religions, places, both geographically, culturally, spiritually, and travel with a group of people from diverse backgrounds, people from the Middle East, not from the Middle East, and see how all of them are interacting with and responding to the environment.
Again, like, I don't mean to like, to really insult people, but it's just like, we are not really given the real picture. I mean,
it's wonderful to be able to connect with other intelligent and engaging students who are passionate about the Middle East. It's great to be able to come together and speak about these things and actively listen and create dialogue.
To be in a group this engaged, this committed to learning from one another and being vulnerable in that process, it pushed me to practice active listening in a way I had never done before. And I think that's the first step towards anything you could call understanding.
There was a lot of truth-telling. People talked about some very intimate things about their identity on this trip with no pressure. And it's a remarkable state of, I think, openness the group created, that some people could talk about some profound things that are often hidden.
As a Jewish person, walking through that refugee camp was very shocking. The way the camp residents, mostly kids, looked at me. It was almost like they were looking at me because I was the reason they were there. They looked at me as if I was part of the problem, part of the reason why they had been condemned to this life for decades, for generations now. And it was just incredibly shocking and moving.
When we visited the refugee camp, you saw the devastation of these people that had been displaced. We went into one of the homes of the refugees whose sons had been imprisoned. We were able to connect with these people to hear their words, the words of the woman.
He lost 33 kilos. The older son, the 24
We also saw another side where our hotel was in Ramallah, where life is still going on for these people.
Before we had entered Israel, I had hope that my fellow students would experience something they didn't expect to experience. I had hoped that they would have a better experience in Israel than they could have imagined, that they would learn more about Israel, learn more about how it's not just a horrible place, and that they should be afraid because they're Arabs. Unfortunately, our first experience in there was blatant discrimination against our Arab students.
By process of self-racially profiling, the Arabs in the group had already determined the fact that they would be put in the detention cube and questioned for hours. We didn't think, though, that anybody would be threatened with deportation because we knew that the professors made sure that we had all the security clearances that we needed in order to get in as American citizens. However, that wasn't the case. By the time we got to Ben Gurion, the Arabs on our group were put in the detention cube. We were questioned for over 6 hours. 2 of us almost got deported because they refused to look at our documents that proved that we were tourists and that we were coming from the United States. We got to see a side of Israel that was a reality that many Arabs face.
When I was waiting in the baggage claim area in the Ben Gurion airport, and I saw young college students coming through waving Israeli flags and excited and happy for their birthright trips, I wished at that moment that they could understand what other college students, whom I was waiting for in the detention room, were going through. The unjustified interrogation of our students left a horrible mark on people's perceptions of Israel. However, another crucial part was the decision by higher security officers to demand that they let our students through and reverse the decision to forcibly deport our students back to Jordan. The incident was so instrumental to understanding the complexities of this conflict because it was so clear to our students, especially those who were detained, of who the enemy was. But what is equally important is that in the end, morality and justice prevailed, showing the good and bad people working in this process. I think that brings a sense of hope to the conflict.
One of my most impactful moments from the trip was meeting with Gilead Sher at the Institute of National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. His discussion with us highlighted the very real strategic concerns and national security tightrope that Israel is walking on. On the one hand, he talked to us about real apartheid and lack of democracy. On the other, increased security threats from failing to make peace. And smack dab in the middle, the fading promise of a two-state solution. He was a living, breathing example of how the security perspective can be humanized and provide critical examination not only of the other, but of Israeli policies as well. How to deal with the Palestinian right of return, which would threaten Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state? What about the reality of occupation, where the immoral use of force is employed daily to control innocent people's lives? The balancing act between Jewish or democratic, defensively aggressive, or occupying force is a difficult one. Right now, Israel is leaving some of the democracy behind in favor of the Jewishness, and exclusionary rhetoric and even violence is on the rise. At the same time, Palestinians commit acts of violence against innocent Israeli civilians, as we saw in the Jal Zone refugee camp, where they were honored as martyrs. The landscape is not purely black or white.
I wrote this poem in response to feeling that sort of, overwhelming sense of confusion in entering Israel from Palestine.
Amar, where are we?
We're about to be deported. To the west of that holy river, my grandparents were born, and to the east of it, they passed away. And on their journey from west to east, they cried to return, and for that I mourn. But my journey will be from east to west, and for that I will write on.
One of the standout speakers that we had the opportunity to meet with was Yossi Klein Halevi, a leader in the Jewish community and an expert in interfaith dialogue. I think he really challenged us to consider the way in which both sides of this conflict must recognize one another's indigeneity if peace is going to be a possibility. It really framed peace as not the achievement of any one singular goal, but as an acceptance of the fact that both sides will feel as though part of their vision is not realized. His reflections on the way in which peace is inherently imperfect is something I've continued to think about nearly a year after our trip.
We met with people that were honest about their government's flaws, but were actively working to change the inequality through education. One of these visionaries we met in the slums of Lod outside of Tel Aviv.
Lod is one of the most underprivileged neighborhoods in Israel, which was mostly settled Bedouins and Arab Israelis.
Shirin the Torhafi showed us the wonderful results of her strategy to work with the Israeli government to create one of the best state-funded schools for Arab students.
She treated every student like family to the point where she was like their mother, and she's really trying to turn around that neighborhood.
I liked you 5 minutes ago.
How was that, guys?
She's awesome.
That woman was awesome. I'm inspired.
Another inspiring project was the Bailey Krogazin School in Tel Aviv, a school for refugee children fleeing violence from over 51 countries and actually protected by Israelis who were allowed to volunteer through their military service.
This one school was just really honoring the heritage of these students by having them enter Israel but are still connected to their heritage.
Students have seen a wide range of things and people, and they've taken away on this journey the undeniable unraveling of the modern Middle East. But they keep in their hearts a journey that will help support the threads of hope that they've also discovered. It's a group that you hug, you remember, and you think this is now a team. My hope is that they've seen enough and will continue to grow enough to contend with the challenge of comprehending complexity and providing the most justice that's possible as an outcome. There was no telling what each of those students was feeling. It might be interesting to return to our website and read some brilliant and compelling narratives that help understand what each of these 15 student, scholar, leaders are thinking and feeling